Welcome to the Pazik Performance Group podcast. I am Tyler Pazik, and today we have Nate Rasmussen back on the podcast. He was on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, and we were just talking about everything baseball, whether it was routines, visualization, leadership, teamwork, how to really talk to an athlete in general through question asking and really diving into their mindset behind it. And today we're getting into that even further with routines and where to start with routines and how to build your routine into an elite routine so that it can actually help you get better day in and day out instead of, maybe you're doing the wrong things, maybe you're doing the right things, but we're going to go through a few different things that will hopefully help you out. All right, let's get into it. What is up, Nate?
What's happening, Tyler? Excited to be back, man.
Yeah, I know not much has changed since we last talked, as in day-to-day activities, I'm sure. But last
Yeah.
time after I clicked stop recording, we got into like another 10-minute discussion on routines. And I was like, you know what? Let's just table this and get on another podcast. So now we're here. But one of the questions that kind of came up during that time after I clicked stop was like, where do you even start with a routine? And we were talking a little bit about how like the first thing I believe from a mental coach perspective is to actually get the kid to just breathe between reps, like take a breath between reps to help you focus. And then once you kind of get that in play, everything else becomes easier. And I think actually the old coach at Long Beach State, he wouldn't, it was either Long Beach State or Fresno State. He wouldn't let his kids the first week take a swing until they took a breath. And if they didn't take a breath, he would kick them out of the cage. And so that's like how important it is. And I don't know, what's your take on like the first thing to be implemented into a routine when it comes to like baseball or softball?
Let's talk about breath for a second. Like in terms of like something we do every day. It's literally one of the only things that we've known how to do our entire lives without thinking, and yet we so misuse it. It's funny how things like that happen when it becomes comfortable or it's something that we know. We don't think about it, and we don't tend to use it for our advantage really at all in comparison because it's just something we do, and that's something can be trained like anything. And so I love the idea of starting the day with some sort of breath. We talk about visualization a lot, and we talk about using it to our advantage. And so the first process, if we're building something, is like, all right, like let's really talk about how your day and how you want your day to go, and let's close our eyes, let's breathe, and let's literally like imagine that day going exactly how we want it to go. And let's feel that presence before we even step in the cage. And that's definitely something you'd see around us, and that's like kind of ground level. Like let's actually figure out how we make it happen before it even happens, and start with off on a good note from the first time that we ever meet you kind of mentalities.
So I have a question about that. Do you guys actually go over like the intention for the day or like the goals? Like, okay, after practice, we want you to look back at practice and be like, oh, I'm glad I hit this goal right here specifically.
I wouldn't say that we get into like that in depth, especially when you're talking in terms of a professional aspect with the amount of bodies that you do have and the amount of time that you have and the amount of things they have going on throughout their day. You can imagine a professional athlete's day is pretty like compounded and everything. We talk a lot about bigger goals, and then we talk about like the goals that are going into it in terms of like their plans or their routines and like how we're accomplishing those. And then we'll kind of take that into like a weekly or bi-weekly reset in terms of like talking about it. But we encourage and talk about writing things down. And so that when we're going into those meetings, you feel like you have formulated thoughts day to day, so that when we do meet and we can not feel like we have to rush that meeting, then it can go a lot better.
You need something? Oh, okay. Damn, cousin came down. All right, well, all right, getting back into it. Uh, Man, I honestly didn't hear the last like sentence you said.
I was just talking about how we
Oh,
we we try not to rush. our thing. So if we were to do them daily, they were our players, we wouldn't actually accomplish anything. So we try to do those like weekly and bi-weekly, and we encourage them to write things down. So then going into those meetings, they have their thoughts formulated in terms of their responses and how they feel going into those review meetings.
Yeah, one thing that I was thinking about was that book 11 Rings by Phil Jackson again, and he talks about how before every practice they would get in a circle at the center of the court and talk about their goals and intentions for that practice specifically. So, like going off of what those guys have written down, hopefully they have something that says like, okay, today at practice, like I really want to get down my rhythm and timing.
Mm-hmm.
Like I want to leave the cage feeling like I got my rhythm down pat. Or
Yep.
what, maybe it's even a more concrete goal than that. Maybe it's like I hope I get 100 swings with 65 of them being at a 95 plus ball exit velo. I don't really
Right.
know what a
Totally.
number is, but what are
There,
there
there
numbers
you
like
go.
that specific?
No, that'd be good. A prime example for something like that is somebody that's working on potentially like leaving breaking ball down. So we're going to track and we're going to go into the drill we've done a couple times. It's like, hey, last time I was 60% correct on this. Like today I want to be at 65% and I want my average exit velocity to be over that. Like that's a very concrete and attainable goal on a day-to-day work. And so we try to keep our goals logical and in the building of a process without it being just like something, this is where we want to be, but this is how this day needs to go and this day needs to go. If you go better than that, awesome, and we'll start from that point next time. But that's definitely stuff they have right in front of them from day-to-day work.
Okay, so we're talked about a little bit like pre-routine, pre-batting cage or pre-practice or pre-scrimmage or game, and a little bit about the post as well, like going in there and like looking at those numbers. And then, so what about like an actual like in cage, like beginning of the routine? So if we were to funnel in, it would be like, okay, pre-practice, then you're funneling in a little bit more, and it's like right before the cage, you check your goals, and now we're getting into the cage and we get into one of those routines. How does that look for maybe a beginner? And then we'll also do someone who's maybe in college and they already think they might have a good feeling for their routine, or at the professional level as well.
Yeah, dude, and that's the thing that I've learned at the professional level more than anything is just the wide array of understanding. Guys are just good sometimes and have no idea why they're good, what they're doing, no sense of routine. You get like the high school kid that that's a top draft pick that was just better than everybody, and he doesn't really know how to build his routine. But you also get the high school draft pick that's better than everybody that really knows what he's doing, and on a day to day, like he's very focused in. Then you get the college guy from a big school, and you're like, oh, well, he went big school. He knows how to really do something and has
He
no
doesn't know
clue,
anything.
nothing. And I had no idea how this guy hit that many home runs or did all this without any sense of what he was actually trying to do. And then you get the opposite. You get like the mid-major guy that you're like, he's going to have to like learn how to, no, he's got his stuff dialed and he really knows what maximizes himself or whatever the case may be. But, we talked about this last time, but learning what they are and what they like to do, I think is the first point we have to do. So if we're talking like a beginner standpoint, like I'm going to see what he has up for his routine. I would say that 75% of the time, there is no routine. There's no rhyme, there's no reason into what they do and why they do it. And I think that how we get them to understand what routine is all about is just ask questions. When you ask the question of, hey, why do you do that? Like normal response, I don't know. Like, I don't know. It feels good. It kind of gets me locked. Well, how's it getting you locked? Like, tell me about it. And like, I might work to a place where I'm like, okay, that wouldn't get me locked, but it looks like it is getting him locked in. So that's good. We can kind of add that in to, the thought process. And then once we get to a point of trust, then we start to get into that, like kind of when you get out of that beginner phase it's more like when you get to that trust phase. Once you get to that trust phase, and some guys trust within 7 minutes, some guys trust within 7 months. And so when we get to that point is when we start to implement and build in like exactly what they need to be working in on, and continuing to work on that relationship daily is how and what drives their routines, especially from our standpoint.
So with a person, you said like 75% of people probably don't even know what a routine is or what it helps with or why you should have a routine. Like those
Yep.
75%, the people that don't really know their routine, what would you suggest to somebody if they were like, okay, I need a routine? What kind of routine would you suggest to them?
The first thing that I would suggest if I was talking to a coach who wanted to put in a routine for those 75% is take everything that you think you know and throw it out and focus exactly on what this player individually is doing. Like we have these concepts in our head of like, oh, well, I'm going to have this go-to routine for this guy in terms of his drill work or how he's going to, but like that guy, it might not work for him. I need to focus on what he's doing. And that's from a breathing standpoint. That's from like a mental capability standpoint. That's from a drill selection standpoint. So like, how do I look at this guy, define his deficiencies, how I see them, look at maybe some data that kind of backs that up. And then, okay, I'm going to try to get him frustrated, see how he responds, then see how he reacts and see if he even has the ability to refocus in those moments, because that's going to tell me a lot on how I'm going to train him. And for me, like I'm constantly taking down notes because I want to be able to understand, okay, these are my 4 guys that I can push, push, push. These are the guys that like I can push to a breaking point, but I got to have like an understanding in there. And then these are the guys like I got to focus all on rebuilding, refocusing, working on their breath more than anything, because if not, it doesn't really matter what the drill's going to do. They're going to be so frustrated that it doesn't really matter.
I just kind of had something click in my brain when you were talking. Maybe it's a ridiculous click, but in BP, everybody takes BP before games. Would it be more beneficial to have like separate BPs within BP for every player? So like, how some players get in and you're like, the normal thing is like, okay, get them over, get them on, get them over, get them in type of thing. Hit and run, line drive opposite way. Instead of doing that, you have some guys like get in there and yeah, they might actually do that because that helps them stay inside the ball and get their timing down, whatever. But then other guys, you're like, hey, like five pitches, like crush it, left center, right center gap.
Yeah, I would say 100%. You should be individualizing, and that's what we like to set up different tiers throughout the day that they can hit on. So whether like there's a machine that's going on the field that day, and then what they're getting in the cage is going to be more BP oriented. What if it's regular arm on the field and machines in the cage, or whatever the case may be, we have some sort of combination, because some guys are going to click up with all of them. And we tend to build routines in a little bit different sense. Like we make a lot of things optional. And the realism of that is to be able to point to them when they're making the decision and it's not working out for them is a more impactful thing, because they're in control of their own routine and their own destiny. And so we're able to point to those that this isn't necessarily getting them to the point, or we get to learn something about them. Some guys are really good when they get themselves ready off the velo machine and don't need that regular fastball BP. And so we try to make that a lot for them to be able to pick and choose exactly what they want to get to. Some guys need to take more swings, some guys need to take less, but 100% we should bucket guys into what they should be working on. I'm not a big move them over guy, but I definitely think that like the way that BP can be set up, some guys need to work a way to get started. Some guys need to let it eat to get started, and then all of a sudden they feel really, really confident. So I think that understanding each one of those individual strengths, weaknesses from a mental capability and from just a routine focus is huge.
Man, I just feel like if I was still a head coach and I was listening to this, I'm like, man, I do like, 5x5. You get in, first 5 swings, you do this. Second 5 swings, you do this. Third 5 swings, you do this. If I was a coach, I would be changing that up and making it specific to every single player on my team, so that when they get in there, they're doing the certain drills in BP. If I'm really attached to BP, then I'm making sure that my guys are doing the drills that are actually going to get them individually ready for this upcoming game.
Yep.
And
100%.
even them too. Like there's this kid Kendall at OU who, like, his thought when he swings, when he's at his best, his one thought is to just hit a line drive up the middle. When he thinks just hit a line drive up the middle, that's when he's hitting his best. So it's like, what is the point of making him do, I don't know, stuff outside of that one thought? Like
Yep.
I can't even think of an example off the top of my head, but like if that's where he's hitting his best, like why not just like make drills that are specific to that thought is kind of what I'm
100%.
thinking right
And
now.
you can even go into more an external focus on that. Imagine the flip side. You got guys that are passive, aggressive, and somewhere in between. So we throw them in BP the exact same. And then when they get to the game, they act like who they are. Well, what if we want to make guys a little bit who are a little bit aggressive and too aggressive? So we mix in a lot more balls in those rounds. And so being able to understand who those guys are and give them a plan to get them prepared for the game and what they need to do to have more success than they're currently having, while also mixing in like the biggest focus for them. If they need to work away for 2 rounds, let's work away for 2 rounds. I don't really care what you work on if it gets you to the point that scores runs. And so, but it's our job to be able to figure that out before then.
That's so good, man. Like, I never even really thought about that. A kid that's over aggressive and you're just like throwing him like, he's going 5 for 5 in BP, and it's like, no, man, you need to intentionally throw him balls so that he has to take them, and ultimately reduce that level of over aggressiveness that has come back to bite him in the butt multiple times in the last 3 or 4 games. So,
100%.
man, that's so good. So, okay, so we did pre. So we're coming into the funnel a little bit more. So we started at pre-game or whatever it is, pre-practice, pre-scrimmage, and then we went into like the actual BP getting warm. Now let's go like in-game routines. So like with an in-game routine, what's one thing, we'll start out with just what's one thing that you talk about a lot when it comes to in-game routines?
What you're doing at each separate time between the 9 guys going through the order. So we talk about like, all right, like you get a hit, you get to first base and you take a long time around. Like at what point do you get to refocus your mind, go over it, write down your thoughts, go over those pitches, and be able to respond to those things? Now in pro ball it's a little different. Like you have access to a lot more things, of some immediate feedback, but there's also limitations within that, like when we're allowed to use video and those types of things. So we really concentrate on the 4 batters before. Like I know you've seen the Longoria clip, but you can start your timing so much earlier. You can start your get loose process so much earlier than the rush to the on deck circle, throw the donut on, swing it a couple times, and then get up there without focusing on our breath. When we get on deck, we want to focus on our timing, our rhythm, our breath, and then if we even have a time for like a visualization timing, like that's even the best spot. That's immediate going into your at bat. And it gives you the closest focal point to that pitcher, and so it gives you an opportunity to visualize what's actually happening in front of you. And we talk about working through at bats even when you're lower. Let's say you're 5 through 9 spots away from hitting again. What are you doing and how are you going through? Take one of those and go through a mental AB with that guy. And actually pick out like, all right, can I figure out what he's going to throw? Can I stay involved and like really access my brain? And then boom, take a guy to just breathe, slow down, focus. And so if you see like our dugout, like a lot of our guys are kind of like intermixed throughout the dugout. We're not going to be on the fence kind of like rah-rahing, because we're like basically we're using every one of those moments kind of for a focus point. And even when you're on the bench, kind of learning to go through those processes and experience them even when you don't have the experience of the game for that moment.
Gotcha. So with those guys, you're starting. They're doing so like 5 through 9 batters out. You're kind of going through a mental A/B and visualizing success with whoever might be up at the plate, or are you visualizing kind of your own A/B against the guy? So are you doing? I guess my question is, are you doing like a shadow round where you're shadowing the guy that's actually in the box, or are you watching the pitch and then visualizing yourself having success against that pitch?
Yeah. So you're visualizing when you're in that like 5 through 9. When you're 4 batters out, you're kind of going through your shadow. You're getting close to up. You're kind of getting yourself into a rhythm, and you're trying to get yourself like mentally prepared so that you don't have to do that process when you get to like your on deck spot. You can really be trying to be clear minded, getting your timing down, and really working on slowing down your breath. That's really what we want to work on deck. It's just like, how can I slow down as much as I can? How can I, be in that process and be present, so that when I'm walking up to the plate in the big spot, that I've already developed that in the littlest spot, and so I feel comfortable, calm, and collected to do so.
Do you guys ever do like 4 batters out or 5 batters out? Do you guys have like an iPad or something there that just has guys roping balls everywhere around the park on loop, and like as they're putting on their batting gloves, they can watch those guys like hitting absolute missiles?
We don't have that as much in available. That's a really good idea. I'm going to write that down, in terms of being able to have that. But what we do have on iPads is just what the pitchers are doing, and so you can see it from like a different focal point. So it's that guy, it's relievers. I mean, we have like 6 iPads in the dugout, but those are all preloaded onto there, and so you can go through everything from the box basically vision point. So
because I was just thinking about Cal State Fullerton softball. They actually have this bucket. I don't know if they had it this year. They definitely had it last year, where they would put pictures on this bucket of all of them, like hitting a home run or a double, and that picture would remind them, would put that image in their head of them having success at the plate. So when there were 4 batters out, they'd be putting on their batting gloves and their helmet and stuff and be sitting on this bucket that had these pictures taped to it, and they would touch their picture and visualize themselves like hitting a home run or hitting a double, whatever it might be. So I was like, man, but if you had an iPad there, that'd be so much
yeah.
easier, and I think the image would be way more vivid in your head, which is what we want in visualization. You want as vivid of an image as you can create. So, okay, so we're 4 batters out, 3 batters out, timing, 2 batters out, really timing, rhythm, and then hopefully maybe even a little bit of visualization right before they get up there. Now, what about like in at bat? Like actually be in during your at bat, how do you teach a routine like pitch to pitch?
Yeah, I think that the teaching of that comes in practice, and setting up drills that are going to replicate the timing in between pitch, and using that as a teaching factor of how they slow down their rhythm. But once you get to that game, we talk about trying to get like a 3x3 box in before. I promise you that like we have never been rushed by an umpire to get back into the box. Getting a 9-second box in there. And that's what we try to do in terms of that, and then also grab a focal point, and being able to slow down your mind during that process. But we're trying to clear all that so that when we step in the box, like we can be committed to whatever the case may be, and however the pitcher's somewhat attacking us, and having a clear and conscious mind at that point. But
Mm-hmm.
we set up that training in practice. We do drills to replicate that type of mentality, that type of feel, and we try to rush the breath so that they can learn to fight against that feeling and really slow themselves down. So,
What about guys that are really good at rushing? Like, how do you get them? Okay, I'm thinking of a speedometer, 0 to
mhm.
100, and a guy plays his best when he's at like a 90 or a 95. So, like, you rushing him, he's actually doing even better. How do you deal with a guy that is already good at going fast?
Yeah, you're talking about like an example, in my opinion, that's not like super prevalent, but it's there. It's definitely there. And usually when it pops up, you notice it because the guy's damn good at baseball, and he tends to like love the moment and those types of things. So I think that keeping him in that range becomes more important. Is living in that range so that when he's slowed down and the game's 8-1, but you're still in high A, and this isn't going to make you a big leaguer by taking this at bat off. Like, you need to understand that big leaguers don't do that, and so keeping him in that mindset as much as we can in training will keep his brain working at that capacity as much as we can. And so it's trying to take away like the shit that allows him to kind of go off. So
Yeah, that's literally exactly what I was just gonna say, was like those guys, they do happen and they're really good in big time situations, but then when they're playing a quote unquote lesser opponent, they play down to their opponent's level a lot because they can't keep themselves up there. So it's like, how do you actually get them to play at that level more often? And one
right.
of the ways is through the breath, like getting them to take it like an explosive breath before they get up there. Or maybe they have to literally do some like jumping jacks to get their heart rate up in the dugout before they go up there if they're feeling like, man, my focus just isn't there right now. Maybe get down, do some push-ups in the dugout or something.
Here,
But
I'll reference one from a team that you could pick out the guy, but I won't say his name. But we had this in Division 1 baseball back in the day. One of our best hitters, he was that guy. He would play down, and then he would play up, and then he'd play down. And so Coach Iwo was actually like, he would always take like a little. This guy would always take like a little swig of pre-workout, and he was like, "Okay, you can take that swig of pre-workout, but you got to slam it on the ground like as hard as you can." You got to yell. So every time he was like going to go on deck, you just hear this slam and yell. And then like eventually our dugout would just go crazy after because he was good too. And so that was kind of like, he was like, hey, do this. And I loved it. I was all about it because it was kind of that same mentality of like, do something like physical to get your brain to understand and wake up. And like for him, it was even just to like smile and like be energetic when, especially when the dugout went crazy for it.
That's excellent. That is so good. Yeah, and oh well, speaking of good, if you're listening to this podcast right now, please, please, please go into iTunes and leave me a rating. That would be also so good. If you've gotten anything out of Nate and I's conversation this time, or even last time, if you listened to our conversation last time too, that one was just as good as this one. I feel like I've already had a bunch of epiphanies going on. But yeah, if you could go in and leave a rating on iTunes for me, I would greatly appreciate it. Anyways, so that is so good. And what I was going to bring up, this is kind of off topic from the whole topic of this conversation today, but going back to a manager's job and a coach's job, it's so much about state management and getting your players into their optimal state. And because it's so much easier to look at somebody and be like, okay, he is not where he needs to be. And he might not even be aware of that. Whereas you could look at him for a split second and know exactly where he's at. And so it's up to you to do something to get him out of that state and into the state that you know he will perform his best at. And like Iwa getting that player to take a swig and slam it on the ground, like that's your quintessential picture of a coach being good at managing the state of his players. Which
100%. The only way you're going to get there is to be present in every moment and to like the understanding. Like so often as coaches, we find ourselves like, okay, who can be the best at like, biomechanics or this drill or whatever the case may be, when so much of it is like, who can be the best at understanding the player and how he is like a human, and then being able to pull at those strings when you need him to dive in the game, but also when you need him to dive in that training, because that's going to be like the best thing for him. And so often, we don't understand that part or really put in our full attention to those pieces.
mm-hmm. And knowing what's going on the field and off the field, so that you can really, really get into your player's head when you need to, and building that trust as well. So okay, anyways, like getting back to the in at bat routines, like you talked about the breath and you talked about a focal point. Like what is the, I guess, like focal point to me is you finding something on the field that kind of helps you get to the next pitch quicker. That's how I've described it. Or like you can look at that maybe left field foul pole, and the left field foul pole reminds you, okay, like left field left behind. So you're leaving that last pitch behind and getting back to the next pitch, or getting back to this pitch. Or it could be the right field foul pole, and you think right field, right here, right now, and then boom, you're locked in. So is that kind of what you guys talk about with focal point, or how do you teach it?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that we go that in depth with it, but that's definitely along the same lines. Like we talk about like how to get out noise and using like that breath and that synced up to a spot. And so it's either going to be on their bat, out in the distance, however the case may be. We kind of leave that up to them, but being able to use that moment to like, that's you, like there's no one else around. Like you get to be at one with your brain right there. That's a hitting coordinator plug right there from Donegal.
When you were talking about that, wait, what was that?
So that was our hitting coordinator's kind of like, that was a little plug for him. Like be at one with your brain right there. Be on your own. Be able to focus and calm yourself. To be able to be, when you step in, like everything's go time.
One breath, one mind. That kind of made me think of the greatest game ever played with Shia LaBeouf, when that guy is out there and he's concentrating on the pin and everything else just sort of fades out. Like this is one of my favorite scenes, and it's like, yeah, that's him blocking out the noise and him just focusing in on that focal point of what he's exactly trying to do.
Or for love of the game, clear the mechanism.
Same thing right there.
Yep.
Like
in on it.
I mean, those movies definitely, those scenes portray exactly what's happening, or what you want ideally to happen anyways. And then also last time we spoke, I was talking about this flow chart that I had. And I think this kind of goes right into the flow chart, because it gets down to you ultimately having trust in yourself. And trust in yourself, the word confidence actually has Latin roots, confidere, which means with intense trust. So when you get to that trust phase of your routine, then like you have the ultimate confidence, and you feel like no matter what this guy throws me, or no matter what I'm going to throw this guy, like I'm going to win. And so how do we get to that trust portion or trust phase of our routine more consistently? And so the flow chart went like this, like one pitch equals, or it was one pitch and then it was an arrow to words, and then it was an arrow to images, arrow to feelings, and then an arrow to trust. So our brain thinks in pictures, and we describe those pictures with words. So when we can describe an image that we're trying to create, then we're able to duplicate those feelings, because the images in our brain create feelings in our body. So like, I'm sure if I were to bring up, like, imagine yourself being powerful and maybe like jumping off the blocks of a sprint, and being powerful with it, like that's creating an image in your head, which ultimately hopefully creates a feeling of power in your legs. Now I'm using words to create those images, which creates feelings. Now in baseball, we have to be able to describe that feeling of us being connected, whatever it might be. And it comes down to always just like one word or one phrase that we use. So it might be literally just like hands back. It might be balance, backside balance, or it might be stay through it, or it might be top half of the ball, or how many baseball players do you know who hit home runs, but they say something like swing down on the ball?
Yeah, I mean,
Or things
it's
like that.
you definitely go through ebbs and flows in terms of terminologies, which is like literally what's like important. So imagine like right now, launch angle is the big craze, right? And so we're already starting to see like improper uses of what this whole mentality brought up. And so you're seeing the other side of it. So even more so now, it's important to understand what they view and where they're viewing, and then being able to cue them down. Like, let's get real. If Mike Trout, Barry Bonds, Alex Rodriguez, all these guys needed to think hit down to hit a home run, I'm not going to be the guy that's going to walk in there and say, you know what, you need to swing up, because it doesn't really matter. Like, at the end of the day, understanding verbiages and getting them to that point is so important. And we talked about this last time, but understanding their verbiage. Their verbiage is what matters. That's what syncs up their brain to be the best version of themselves. But so often we want them to understand what we're talking about. And guess what? I don't walk up to the plate with them. So it's more important, 100%, exactly what you're getting at. If that guy thinks swing down and he hits 40 home runs, guess what? Swing down all day, baby. I love when you swing down.
Yeah. And like, getting back to that, swing down is the word phrase that creates an image in their head and ultimately a feeling in their body. And any, or at least most elite coaches, whether it's basketball, baseball, softball, they always say, like, if you want to be really good at a skill, you have to be able to repeat the feel. So now, working backwards in that flow chart, how do you repeat the feel? Well, you repeat the image in your brain. How do you repeat the image in your brain? You come up with words for that image in your brain. And I have found, maybe you can, shed some light on this as well, but I have found that a lot of really talented athletes that are just good, they cannot describe the feeling that they get when they're connected.
Yeah, 100%. I think that the more you're connected, the more you have a difficult time explaining each feel, because it's almost as if from start to finish it's working together. At least that's the way that I feel from it. When there's pieces out of sync, it's really easy to feel like when those pieces were in sync, but I don't know how to explain it. But I can tell you that all those players can tell you when that was, what piece wasn't in sync. Oh, that was my hands, oh, that was my lower half, that was whatever the case may be. They can tell you that specifically. So we're trying to really get them to a point where they almost are like, oh, I don't know what the connected feeling is. That doesn't matter, as long as you know, like, when something isn't connected, because then you can start to adjust and go from that point.
And you brought up a very, very good point about like the don't zone and the do zone, and how, like, when you feel like something is not connected, so it's like, man, I didn't get my hands back right there, and it's like, okay, well, you didn't get your hands back, what do you want to do? It's like, well, I do want to get my hands back. And it's like, okay, well, just think about that. And now you simplified back down the process to just this one thought. And when they're thinking that one thought, and for Mike Trout and Barry Bonds and Alex Rodriguez, it was swing down. When they're thinking that one thought, everything else just gets back aligned and they're good to go. So that exactly what you just said, when they know what's not helping them, that literally just taking the word not out of that sentence can probably shift the sentence to help them get back to where they need to be.
Yeah, 100%. I would say good coaches versus bad coaches. Bad coaches go like, "Hey, you didn't get your backside through." Good coaches go, "Hey, how did that feel? Why did it feel that way? What are you going to do different?" All of a sudden, they've created that do, and I haven't had to say that do. And if that isn't matched up with what we think, good. Allow them to do it wrong, trying to do it that way, and then they're going to realize, ah, shit, that wasn't it. That's okay. So now I can come back to that process. And so, like exactly what you're saying, how do they create that phrase themselves rather than me creating that phrase for them? How do
So
they understand where they're
what were those three questions you just asked?
at? So if you were to walk into the cage, these are like you'd probably be bored hearing me say these three things. How did that feel? And they're usually going to say it felt good, it felt bad. Like when I was saying, okay, why did it feel that way? It felt like I didn't get my backside through. Felt like I didn't stay through extension, whatever the case may be. And okay, what are you going to do to fix that? Well, I'm going to get in the path earlier. Okay. So I could have said like, hey, you cut the path. Like, but that might not make sense to him. So I need him to explain to me what he's feeling. And so like I'm constantly asking those three questions and then writing down what they say here when it matches up with kind of what I'm viewing. And then all of a sudden I'm able to use his verbiage in that sense.
Mm-hmm. So let's go through it. That was an example of a thing going wrong. Could we go through an example of a thing going right?
Yeah, I mean, I think going right is a lot harder to understand from his perspective because I could say like, oh, how did that feel? Well, it felt good. Why did it feel good? I have no idea. And that kind of goes back to that like connected feel, right? And so
Mm,
a lot of the times with things that are feeling good, I tend to put them into like a pitch rec standpoint. I'm like, okay, well, where was the baseball? Okay, and where did you hit it? And so it gets them more external. So it's like, okay, when I hit the baseball in that spot, in that spot in the baseball or whatever the case may be, that makes me feel more connected. So then I can push that out to the baseball a little bit more, and so that we're not thinking always internalized with our body. And so those are like when I'm in the good moments, I try to push them out of their body as quick as I can in terms of their mental focus.
yeah, that. I mean, that's that's so key with the good stuff, because if they can't describe what they're doing when things are going well, it's going to be way harder to stay there because they
Mm-hmm.
can't. It's like, describe yourself when you're playing at your best. Describe yourself when you're not playing at your best. It's so much easier to describe yourself when you're not playing at your best, because when we're playing well, we don't ever think about why we're playing well. It's like, okay, well, you might think then, like, if I can describe what it's like when I'm playing well, then I'll be able to stay there more often. And if I'm not playing well, I'll be able to get back there quicker. Which,
100%. I tell you what, man, when I'm playing pickup basketball, if I'm feeling good, it's just give me the ball. You know what I mean? When I'm feeling bad, I'm like, I'm not getting through, whatever the case may be. It's the same idea. Like, we like to pretend that those things are different. They're not. Like, and we go through those on a day to day basis. The more we can understand that, the easier it'll be to communicate with our guys.
mm-hmm. Yeah, that's beautiful. And even one, like, taking this a step further, even then it's that much easier to help them pitch to pitch or at bat in the actual game, because you might not have the time to sit there and ask him 7 to 9 different questions during a game, but you do have time to tell him, hey, like, get back on path, or whatever it might be. Like, just a quick cue that are his words, they're his words from the practice or from the cage session that you had, and now you're able to take that into a game and help him get back on his game quicker.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like, yeah, when I was working with OU again, there was one player who we talked about seeing the pitch before the pitch even came, and because it looked like he was just going up there with no plan, and he looked sped up, and he looked like he didn't know what he was even doing. And so I just reminded him, I'm like, hey man, like, see the pitch before it actually happens, and he goes out there and he rips a double down the line, and then he winds up coming all the way around to score. First person he comes to is me, and he goes, yo man, I saw that in my head before it actually happened. It was so hype.
Yeah.
It was awesome. But like, that was us having a common language that we spoke about beforehand to use in the game, again, to help him get back to where he plays at his best.
Absolutely.
So with the in continuing on this like in at bat routine though, so we talk about like, you know, taking a breath and going through your regular routine, whatever that means. Now, what I used to teach is that you should do the same thing every single time. Like you should unstrap your batting gloves the same way every time. You should kick the dirt the same way every single time. You should tap each side of the plate every single time the same way. And what I've kind of come to realize throughout coaching that is that it's not necessarily if you do the same thing exactly to a T every single time, but it's more or less like having mental checkpoints within your routine to be like, okay, am I in control of myself or am I not in control of myself? Am I thinking about something I need to be thinking about, or am I thinking about something that is completely out of context? And so it's more like, you know, say a guy walks up to the plate and he swipes out the box and, you know, he taps the plate in the middle and on the other edge. So that tapping should be a point where he's like, okay, like tap, tap. I'm thinking about whatever my one thought is. You know, I'm thinking about being connected. I'm thinking about top half. I'm thinking about swinging down on the ball, whatever it is. Or he goes tap, tap, and he's like, man, just please, like, don't ground out to the shortstop. Like anything but that again, man. And then that should be a mental checkpoint for him to be like, oh, I'm not thinking about what I need to be thinking about. Step out of the box, reset, and then go ahead, maybe look at your focal point, take a breath, and get back to thinking about what you need to be thinking about before, you know, the next pitch comes. Is that how you
I
teach
love
it,
it.
or is that like does that you've known me for a couple of years though? Like that's how I used to teach it, and now I teach it more like mental checkpoints than, because there's so many people that I found, and this is how I came to this conclusion, is that there's a lot of baseball and softball players out there that are super fidgety, and they don't even know they do like just random shit between pitches, you know. But they'll always get back to a couple of things. One is the focal point or the breath, and those are where they're like, okay, like think about what you need to be thinking about.
Yeah,
Right.
100%. That's what we should be trying to get them to, and not have the actuality of the routine be like a crutch for those thoughts. Like at the end of the day, why we're doing that is hopefully giving them checkpoints for their body to like get their brain back into it. And so as long as they're getting to it within parts of it, because that's been my biggest part. You know, I worked with a couple of different mental skills coaches, and obviously you, and that's always been a thing, is like, okay, why does it have to be perfect? If they get their thoughts back, and if we're encouraging when they're in green or go or whatever the case may be, to really get back into there and just go through their short routine or whatever the case may be, like at the end of the day, it's not about the length or exactly what they're doing. It's just as if we can clear the brain and kind of again be conscious and be present with, you know, positive thoughts.
One thing I wanted to bring up about that clear the brain phrase that you just said right there, the research behind it is actually that there's like, and I don't know if you've ever heard me say this, but there's like two sides of our brain. Basically, we have our short-term memory and our long-term memory, and our long-term memory is where our muscle memory lies. So, but
Mm-hmm.
the stimulus from the outside first goes through our short-term memory. You know, like in our short-term memory, we have 40 to 50,000 thoughts a day, but not all those thoughts make it into our long-term memory. So how do we like bypass this short-term memory when we're actually going pitch to pitch? And how you bypass that is you fill this with just one thought. So like a lot of people think that our brain is clear, but what we're really doing is we're supremely focused on just one thing. And
Right.
so then when we can focus on just that one thing, it skips over the short-term memory and we're able to get to our muscle memory or just doing it at that point. So
Makes that phrase even more important.
yeah, right. I don't know. Did you know that though?
I did not know that. No, I don't think we talked about it before.
Yeah. So like that is basically the importance of like the one thought kind of system, or like getting back to, okay, just thinking about one thing instead of multiple things. And we've all overthought at some point, but that's, and I used to say simplify it down to three things. Now I say just simplify it. It's even simpler than three things. It's one thing.
Yep.
And that's when you're at your best. And actually, I had another mental performance coach, Gina Karnashovas, on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, and she said that when she has two black belts, one in Taekwondo and another in karate, which are two separate things. And
Mm-hmm.
she talked about her instructor would always tell her, Gina, you're trying to catch too many bunnies at one time. And so, you know, chase two bunnies, catch none.
Right.
So just chase one. Simple.
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay. Well, I mean, that's basically it. And then afterwards, you're just breaking down your at bat. And we kind of went over that as like a it's almost like your post at bat for one AB is then your pre at bat for your next AB.
Yeah, to a certain extent. I think there's a lot of things that can kind of go in there. If we're doing our processes throughout the at bat, throughout the lineup correctly, like our thoughts are going to stay the same, but the situation, the experience could all be a little bit different. So I think it's understanding that. Excuse me.
Bless you.
I think it's understanding that, and then being able to formulate bigger, in-depth plans, and then being able to again get back to that one thought, and being able to clear the mind, get back to one thought, and then allow your thoughts to be kind of on the situation at hand.
Mm-hmm. And what about like post game? What do you teach for post game?
Yeah, so that's going to be different for each guy. Some guys need that like immediate, like, hey, I need to look at this, like we need to go over this like immediately. And to push that away is probably bad for him, even though it's like, man, it's 11:30 at night and I kind of want to get back. But it's like at the end of the day, this is his career, this is my job. So so some of those guys will do that. Sometimes I'll be like, hey, go think about it, like, and work through your ABs. Let's talk tomorrow morning. It's a good thing about pro ball with no class. Like, let's meet in the video room at this time, and let's actually like come in with your thoughts written down and be like, all right, so I had thought this, and now after thinking about it, like, I don't think that's how it came. So much more often, once they give themselves like the break away and then come back, they experience such a deeper thought about it that they are able to come back. And then sometimes they'll come back and be like, it was this, and then we'll pull up the video and be like, it wasn't that. So all these thoughts you had in a negative sense, and then we saw it, and then they're like, okay, well, that was dumb to worry about. So it allows them the process of being able to be like, okay, so why did I ruin the last 8 hours of my life thinking about that singular pitch when it wasn't even where I thought it was? Where that immediate feedback, and then it gets them working on like some other things. And as you know, like, we want them to get to sleep and be able to rest and rejuvenate, and then be back for the next day when you got 140 games, like playing every single day. So to be able to get through that process and then come back the next day with a fresh mind for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think post game breakdowns are exactly for that, so that you can get to sleep with a calm mind. So many coaches and players overthink exactly what happened. Did I make the right call here? Should I have swung at this pitch? Did I execute the situation the way I was supposed to execute the situation? It's like having something to go to after the game so that you can break it down, whether it be objectively or subjectively. Like,
Mm-hmm.
just having something to go to is better
Right.
than just sitting there and letting your brain run amok on you.
And what's frustrating about those moments? The guys you talk to the most, like, they will go out and they'll be like, they had an 0 for 4 and they want to talk to you about it. And you go in the video room, you're like, you hit every ball over 100 miles an hour. You got out 4 times. Like, sorry, tomorrow if you do that, you're going 4 for 4. So like that's so often the conversation, and like they can't handle, like, they work at such a different level than the normal human being. And so just getting back to like what's important, and living in that what's important moment, like, again, redefine success. We talked about that last time with failure. Redefines that moment so that they can hopefully get through and be like, I crushed 4 baseballs today. I got out, but my org actually thinks that that's good. So I'll
Yeah.
be able to do that.
Yeah, man, that's so true. You got to get back to what you define success as, because if you define success as going 0 for 4, even though you hit the ball 100 miles an hour each time, it's going to be a long, long career for you.
Exactly. Exactly.
But also probably pretty prosperous if you're going 4 for 4 with 100-mile-an-hour exit velos.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, it's funny. As much as people understand that, they still aren't ever angry when they flare in a hit or go through a six-hole for a hit. And so like that's okay too. Like we got to keep them positive, and so we can kind of draw off the thing that we know is not super beneficial in the long run, and then keep pushing them towards what they do well and what is really important. And again, that process, then it's not you're failing 7 out of 10. It's like you're failing 4 out of 10, and then you're failing 3 out of 10 when we really start to kind of get them to the right mentality, and
Hmm.
then you can live at a higher level for a longer time.
Yeah. That's where it's at. So wrapping this up, what's like your number one takeaway or the number one thing you think people should get out of this podcast?
Um, Understand your players, understand them on a deeper level. Don't just like assume that every player is mentally exactly where you're at. And what I mean that in terms of not that they're always behind you. Sometimes they're ahead of you, and that's a hard thing to recognize too. When you're the coach and you recognize that they're working and operating at a different level mentally. But I think the more you can ask questions, understand your player, the better you're going to be able to cue him when you need to cue him, and the simpler that process is going to be for you. But don't just assume you know him because you coached for this many years or this many guys. That's not the way it works. Every human's different.
Hmm. Individuality, man. That's definitely where it's at, and that's my biggest takeaway from this as well. Is like, yeah, no, just understand your players at a deeper level so that you can help them when they need your help the most. All
Yep.
right, man. Thanks for being on. I appreciate it. We'll talk soon.